Just hours before Friday's Putin-approved display by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance in the Oval Office, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with a bipartisan delegation of senators. It was big smiles and warm handshakes. The Republican chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Roger Wicker, described the meeting as a show of support. And yet, just a few hours later, after Trump and Vance berated Zelensky in the Oval Office, some of those very same Republicans who had been all smiles and handshakes quickly changed their tune. Senator Wicker, who had just last month said that Vladimir Putin should be imprisoned, if not executed, tried to quietly delete his post touting his attendance. Quick note to the senator, the internet doesn't forget, it turns out. And then there's Senator Lindsey Graham, who was literally posing for pictures with Zelensky earlier in the day, and who then ran to the cameras after the Oval Office spectacle and bizarrely attacked Zelensky, even suggesting that he should resign. This is the same senator who just 2 weeks ago said that the best way to contain Vladimir Putin was to arm Zelensky to the teeth. Man, what a difference one blow-up in the Oval Office can make. And joining me now is Democratic Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona. He's a member of the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees, and he was part of the group of bipartisan senators who met with President Zelensky on Friday. Senator Kelly, thank you so much for joining me. I think we're all reflecting on Friday and that meeting. It was like nothing I've ever seen in my time working for two presidents, watching Republicans in that Oval Office. But I wanted to start by just asking you about that meeting with Zelensky you attended by a bipartisan group. What was that like, and what was the response in the private room to him?
Well, Jen, I think we all have a little bit of PTSD, even though we weren't in the Oval Office meeting, right? I think all of us, a lot of people across the country collectively. The contrast between the two meetings was quite remarkable. With Zelensky that morning, I think there were about 10, maybe a dozen of us, Democrats and Republicans. It was very constructive. I would say one of the most interesting things about it was that at the beginning of the meeting, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, Roger Wicker, senator from Mississippi, asked the cameras to leave. And then we got down to business. Zelensky, as he always is, this guy is habitually thankful to the American people, to the United States Congress, to the president. So it was constructive. Not a single one of us expected what happened in the Oval Office to happen. And I have to say that was a mistake. I think it was a miscalculation by the president. Bullying an ally of ours makes us look weak. And when we are weak, we are less safe. The American people should make no mistake about that. What happened in the Oval Office was a complete and utter disaster. And it puts us in a much worse situation, not only with the Russians and the Ukrainians, but with our European allies. And I hope we can repair it. There are people in that room that I think are responsible adults. They weren't speaking out.
I tell you, our allies are scared and our enemies are laughing.
It was like maybe when you were 2 years old and you got in trouble for putting your hand in the cookie jar, It's like, oh, you didn't thank your parents enough for raising you. Or, that's how I felt watching it.
It's all about kind of like, are you grateful enough? Are you saying thank you enough?
Yeah.
Do you love me enough? As opposed to it's life and death that we're talking about here.
But I felt like it was completely planned, Abby. I mean, even Trump said, this was great TV, and it's sort of like he let the cat out of the bag. Like, I think that this was staged, planned, because Trump and Vance know they're playing to the American public more than anything else. And if you go on any social media, you're seeing people say, yay, we got America back again, make America great again. And I was asking, how does this make America great again? I mean, this is different than being tough on crime or tough at the border. This is like, okay, I guess we're not going to give $350 million to Ukraine anymore. But what about U.S. security?
Okay, so answer her question.
I've never seen anything like this. It's absolutely unprecedented. And carried out, if this goes in the direction that it seems to be going, this meeting will be remembered as a moral and a strategic disaster initiated by the President of the United States and his Vice President. And it had all the uplift and spectacle of a mugging. this didn't happen by accident. Vice presidents and presidents don't pull off something like this spontaneously. They waited to the last question. It was apropos of almost nothing. The vice president got immediately in the face of Zelensky and demanded why didn't he thank him enough? And Zelensky had thanked the United States over and over again, including in this meeting, in private and in public. It was under totally false pretenses. It was a performance of a vile kind. And what are the consequences? The consequences are the possibility that the United States, after 80 years, is going, in a sense, to switch sides to the autocracy, to the dictator, Vladimir Putin, and leave behind Europe to its own devices, not just Ukraine, but Europe itself. Thankfully, in Europe today, you've seen the leadership in France and in Britain do its best to clean up after the elephant, the United States. It's a shameful spectacle, and I have a hard time believing that it'll end there as just as something of little consequence. It's going to have great ramifications.
And I want to get into the substance of this, which I think is so important to discuss. Ambassador McFaul, though, I think we've heard the speculation David just mentioned that it was a setup. It felt like a bit of a setup. What do you think, and to what end? What do you think they're trying to achieve here?
Well, they were trying to achieve messaging to their base. Vice President Vance is running for president, just as he did at the Munich Security Conference 10 days ago or so. I was there. That speech was a campaign speech for his base and insulted the entire continent of Europe. And this was designed for that. And this incredibly insulting, why don't you thank us? Again, with David, it was so embarrassing to me as an American. I just want to say that publicly. This is not the way our leaders have ever behaved. I've been in meetings with our former boss, Jen, that got heated from time to time with leaders, including with Russian leaders. But it was behind closed doors, and that's the way diplomacy is supposed to take place. And the fact that this took place with the cameras rolling suggests that it was for the cameras. And one last thing on the thank you. Why don't you thank us? I want to remind everybody that this team, Trump and Vance, has done absolutely nothing for President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. The American people, yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. He said that 1,000 times. But what have they done? They've told him he has to give up his territory. They told him he can't join NATO. They told him Americans will not participate in a peacekeeping force. They have not given new assistance. And by the way, the last package of assistance, their party delayed for 6 months while Ukrainians were being slaughtered on the battlefield, and Senator Vance voted against that package. So why in God's name should they be seeking a thank you from President Zelensky? Now, I want to say it ended badly for everyone. I think the Ukrainians regret this meeting, too. I hope they can get it back on track. But I'm not optimistic, because I don't think fundamentally Trump cares about a peace deal. He cares about his relationship with Putin. Whether there's peace in Ukraine or not is entirely a secondary or tertiary concern of his.
David, let me ask you about the what next of this all, because there are reports over the course of the last 24 hours the Europeans are going to present a plan. Obviously, the United States has long been a huge provider of security, equipment, financial assistance. What are the European? What do they have the capacity to do, and what gaps can they fill? Will there still be big ones here?
Well, the Europeans have great wealth, and it's quite possible that they're going to kick in even more. And it should be said that they have contributed mightily in the effort to hold off the Russians so far. It shouldn't be discounted at all. And the United States also, we haven't mentioned why there was a meeting in the first place in Washington. The Trump administration was basically extorting the Ukrainians, saying, we want half your mineral wealth. Nice country you got there. That deal ultimately did not get signed, not least because Zelensky was kicked out of the White House unceremoniously. It's just one humiliation after another. And it should be noted that Volodymyr Zelensky will be counted in the annals of history as an immense hero. And not just a hero to his own people, the Ukrainians, but a hero to what we call the West, the free world. He is right. He never demanded that the United States send troops. He never demanded the Europeans send troops. He asked for as much assistance as he could get, even as he was watching tens of thousands of his citizens being killed on the battlefield. And the other dynamic here is the opponent, Vladimir Putin, has seen at hundreds of thousands, we don't know the exact casualty rate, but certainly several 100,000 have been killed and wounded combined. We don't know, again, we don't know the exact numbers, but the damage to his people is immense. And here's the punchline. He does not care. He is willing to put as much meat into the meat grinder as it takes to subdue and conquer Ukraine, because he sees that as his historical duty. He wants to reestablish Greater Russia in the 19th century sense, and he's willing to let as much blood flow as possible. That's the dynamic here.
Ambassador McFaul, we kind of saw, I mean, Dmitry Peskov, you're very familiar with him. We're all very familiar with him, the three of us, but yes. He came out and said today that the Trump administration's foreign policy largely coincides with our vision. That, to me, was a pretty chilling statement to hear from him, a longtime spokesperson for Vladimir Putin. How did you read those comments? How should people read them?
I'm so glad you put that up and acknowledge that. Yes, I used to deal with Mr. Peskov. He used to talk about you, Jen, back in the day.
Very familiar. Hello there, Dmitry, if you're watching. Yes.
He chooses his words.
Folks, what we're seeing here is Trump's plan exposed. Because as noted there, a lot of people felt this was, you know, a traditional Trump blow-up. And in some ways it was, of course, but that it was totally spontaneous. That this was just Trump losing his cool, his team losing their cool, and it ending in this cluster muck of a mess. But as we know, Donald Trump did sort of keep his cool for most of the meeting. And while Trump losing his temper is pretty on brand, JD losing his temper in the way he did, that's not his MO. I'm not saying he's a perfectly zen guy, but we saw him in the debates, right? We saw Trump versus Vance, and I'm not going to try to sane wash Vance, but he didn't have a Trump-style meltdown. He didn't. He lied about a lot. Spat the big lie out, but that was very much planned. You could see it there. There are people saying this was a planned thing, a planned humiliation of Zelensky. And it was brilliant by Zelensky to insist in many ways that we have this big public meeting, ostensibly because, we want to demonstrate that this regime still supports us. But the fact is, he knew that Trump is leaning towards Putin harder than ever. And he knew that Trump was going to say what he was going to say regardless of the venue. But if there was no cameras, no one would have believed Zelensky that how bad it was getting. Zelensky needed it to have cameras there, and he was right to do it.